is on Chinese foreign direct investment to infrastructure of ASEAN countries. I will start with a small introduction. In this paper, we asked ourselves in what ways did the Chinese FDI into ASEAN economies and infrastructures advance Chinese Belt and Road Initiative project. We came up with this research question looking at the importance given by the Belt and Road Initiative to infrastructure investment in Southeast Asia. The Belt and Road Initiative is more than a free trade agreement because economic, diplomatic, and geopolitical stakes are part of this initiative. Thus, high-quality investment is key to meet Belt and Road Initiative's agenda. We divided our paper into 5 main parts. The first part is a global risks opportunities assessment for ASEAN in relation to Chinese Belt and Road Initiative FDI. The other 4 parts are an in-depth analysis of the 4 main recipients of Chinese infrastructure FDI, which are Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia. Now I'll introduce the part on ASEAN. I divided my analysis in 3 parts, the first part being on Chinese foreign direct investment in ASEAN from 2000 to 2013, a historical rundown of FDI development. In this part, I give a historical economic overview of Chinese FDI into ASEAN, explaining why infrastructure investment has been one of the main areas of investment since the early 2000s. In the second part of my analysis, I will look at the motivations of China behind the Belt and Road Initiative infrastructure investments, and I will also evaluate the risks and opportunities behind these projects for ASEAN countries. In the third and final part, I will focus on more contemporary issues such as the US-China trade war and the COVID-19 pandemic, looking at the economic impacts on ASEAN economies and how those two crises interfere with the Belt and Road Initiative. In this paper, we did not only focus on Chinese FDI, but we also compared it to other investors in the region. Looking at overall FDI inflows, ASEAN is the first FDI provider to ASEAN. The US and Japan have been decreasing their FDI both in net inflows and in the total share of FDI inflow into ASEAN. By increasing FDI expenditure, notably in capital-intensive infrastructure projects, China could take over Japan and the US traditional role in ASEAN. In short, ASEAN gains from the Belt and Road initiatives are substantial since 2013. Despite the numerous risks around Chinese lending, Southeast Asia could largely benefit from tighter relations with China, better hard and digital infrastructure, and increasing connectivity within the ASEAN.
This section will be discussing Singapore and China's economic influence. First, I will go over the relationship between China and Singapore in terms of FDI with a focus on infrastructure. Singapore is an extremely attractive nation in terms of investment to foreign nations, including China, for several reasons, and I want to highlight some of those main factors. It has for many years been considered as one of the best nations to do business by the World Bank, has signed bilateral treaties with 46 other nations, which some of these are terminated or not yet in effect, but it still successfully indicates its strong international ties. And also next, it can connect China to other sea nations, meaning by setting up regional headquarters in Singapore after the investment. It can be operated on behalf of the Chinese company and is able to apply FDI in nations such as Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam, which do not hold a favorable stance towards China, while masking the Chinese identity of the company. The Singaporean government continuously puts effort into updating and spreading of domestic social efficiency in order to meet the foreign demand, which provides conditions for foreign firms to succeed. Singapore is also famous for the internationally friendly workforce, which is flexible and diverse. One of the most attractive factors of Singapore for China to invest is that Singapore is predominantly Chinese. Next, data according to the World Bank, Singapore ranked 6th in the infrastructure sector for the LPI, Logistics Performance Index score. If you could look at the next figure, which is the amount of inflow of FDI into Singapore from 1970 to 2020 in US dollars, it indicates an increasing trend over the years. Although there seems to be interest from China, there were no significant amount of Chinese FDI into Singapore at the moment, since it is not even in the top 10 investors of Singapore as of the most recent statistics in 2018 according to the Singaporean government. But instead, I found that Singapore is a top investor into China. The chart with the data according to the government of Singapore shows that Singapore invests twice as much money into China compared to the second most invested country, which is Indonesia. I also focused on the Singapore and China's three major government-to-government joint projects related to infrastructure. First, Suzhou Industrial Parks, SIP, is an establishment in China made in February 1994. SIP is noted as a significant access for China to reform and open up international cooperation. The Sino-Singapore Tianjin Eco-City is the second government-to-government deal conducted by Singapore and China. Both nations have dedicated their time into effectively sharing knowledge, specialties, and experience in important fields such as urban planning, environmental protection, resource conservation, water and waste management, and sustainable development. The China-Singapore Chongqing Demonstration Project in Strategic Connectivity is the last government-to-government joint project between Singapore and China that focus on four major elements of cooperation: aviation industry, financial services, transportation logistics, and information and communication. The key theme is modern interconnection and modern service economy, and it is in line with the strength of Singapore in trade, which is the service sector, and effectively utilizes the characteristics of its economy to incorporate into the intergovernmental project. The theme also goes along with the key strategies of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is also relative to other sections of the paper. Singapore and China have maintained strong economic ties for years, and since 2013, China has been Singapore's largest trading partner, while Singapore has been China's greatest investor. Although China is not in the top 10 investing nations for Singapore, it is certainly showing interest, and Singapore surely has enough potential and attractiveness in order to receive FDI from China. Its location and connection with Southeast Asia, the predominantly Chinese population, and its recognition by the international community further strengthens its relationship with China. Although both nations do not significantly contribute to the infrastructure sector of the other, the governments of China and Singapore have cooperated in three major joint projects related to infrastructure as well as contribution to BRI. Thank you.
So now we'll look at the study case of Malaysia. First, for a brief overview of the recent trends. Before 2012, the share of Chinese FDI going to Malaysia was relatively small, at least compared to that of other countries. So as you can see from the figure, in 2008, it constituted only 1.3% of total FDI in Malaysia. But since 2013, with the launch of the Belt and Road Initiative, Chinese investors' interest in Malaysia has been rapidly increasing. And indeed, FDI jumped to 2.2% in 2013 and then to 6.2% in 2016. And what exactly are the main driving forces behind this increase in FDI? And in particular in infrastructure? Well, first, one of the main reasons would be that Malaysia is China's biggest trade partner in ASEAN. Thus, Chinese investors have interest in ensuring infrastructure in order to facilitate entry and exit of Chinese goods. There is also strategic profits. For instance, Malaysia's location between Singapore and Thailand makes it especially attractive to foreign investors, as it gives access to other expanding markets. And also from a Malaysian perspective, it's very important to attract Chinese FDI to infrastructure, as regions in eastern Malaysia like Sarawak and Sabah have underdeveloped transport networks. And also, as the population there is growing, demand for infrastructure development is increasing. Additionally, the service sector, which has the highest share of Malaysia's GDP, is mainly based on tourism and foreign trade. These are sectors that require infrastructure as they rely on connectivity, logistics, and transportation. I also wanted to put forward what would be the future prospects of Chinese FDI in Malaysia. So first, looking at the challenges, we can see that there is considerable domestic distrust towards the growing presence of Chinese investment in the country, in particular for large-scale public-funded projects, which is kind of understandable as they pose high economic risks, especially in a country with rising national debt. Secondly, the political environment of Malaysia is complex due to the regime changes and corruption scandals in the past few years. This has had a negative impact on its foreign investment environment, and it represents losses to the infrastructure projects led by Chinese enterprises. There's also the fact that Malaysia has a complex tax system with high requirements and quite a lot of local protectionism. And for recommendations for the way forward, I would say that mega projects that are funded with public money should try to improve transparency. And also, the Malaysian government will and should probably continue to take project-specific approach to reviews. So in other words, they should try to investigate project by project and renegotiate with Chinese investors whenever they see that there's negative impacts on the domestic economy.
Now I will be discussing the economic relation between Thailand and China. This graph shows the foreign investment from the major countries to Thailand that was approved from 1985 to 2019, reported by the Board of Investment of Thailand, BOI. In 2019, China became the second largest investor following Japan, dominating 26.2% of the total foreign investment. While the investment showed a steep decline in 2017 due to the foreign direct investment regulation that was enacted by the Chinese government, it recovered quickly with an investment growth rate of 188.5% in 2018 and 125% in 2019. Unlike other emerging Asian countries, China is increasing its presence in the investment of digital infrastructure due to the impact of digitalization and rising demand for an advanced communication infrastructure in Thailand. In response to the declining workforce and imbalance in the digital industry's labor, the government is aiming to increase productivity through digital technology and is calling for the active participation of Chinese companies, which are highly competitive internationally in artificial intelligence and next-generation communication technology. This also benefits China to have Thailand as an international digital gateway in the BRI. Through PPP, private-public partnership, Thai government is seeking economic cooperation. In April 2018, the government announced the digital partnership with Alibaba, the largest online retailer in China, to promote the development of IT human resources, improve the IT literacy of small and medium-sized businesses, and promote the expansion of sales of Thai agricultural products to China. Furthermore, the CEO of Alibaba pledged to invest up to $300 million in the EEC over the next 5 years. Not only Alibaba, but also Huawei, a Chinese technology company that is the leading provider of information and communication technology, has increased its impact on the Thai economy. Here is a brief timeline showing a close relationship between Huawei and Thai government. The promised investment and cooperation in terms of the fusion of technology, human resource development, etc. will positively impact Thailand's digital economy. Again, you can see how Thai governments find significance in an investment of Chinese investors in making Thailand the digital hub. To further facilitate this movement of developing digital infrastructure, as part of the Thailand 4.0 and EEC project, Thailand's new digital innovation precinct, Digital Park Thailand, has been set. The project, also known as the Eastern Economic Corridor of Digital (EECD), has tremendous potential for investors to tap into emerging opportunities offered by the kingdom's transformation to Thailand 4.0. breaking new ground for technology firms, startups, and investors. Numerous policies and incentives have been introduced by the government to facilitate investment in digital park and to stimulate the country's digital transformation. While this is still under construction, the Thai government estimates that EECD development would generate about $1.6 billion digital investment. The government also announced that the major investors in the digital park are globally known IT companies from China, Taiwan, and the US. This shows how China has already taken the lead in the development of EECD. Since Digital Park Thailand is still waiting for its full-scale operation to take place, it has already launched a public hearing event in both Japan and China. Hence, we might see further inflow of FDI from China in digital sectors. So, what is going to happen in the future? One problem with Thailand that it must overcome is the political instability. This figure shows the data of Thailand's political stability index from 1996 to 2019, provided by the World Bank. Note that the world average of 195 countries in 2019 was minus 0.05, while Thailand scored minus 0.54. The frequent partisan conflict and anti-government demonstrations might affect the business confidence of investors. A study done by Escalaras and Kotaridi in 2014 indicates that macroeconomic instability, macroeconomic uncertainty, and social-political instability jointly harm private investment. However, it is known that economic growth from FDI will have positive impact on Thailand economy. According to Thanapol 2014 and Sassiwimon 2019, past inflow of FDI into Thailand has had a positive effect on wages and productivity growth. And also according to the Economic Impact Assessment of Frost and Sullivan 2020, it says that if Thailand is successful in the development of digital industry through promotion of FDI that is currently going on, high socioeconomic impacts are expected. Hence, we might see a further increase in the inflow of FDI from China into Thailand.
Compared to its Malaysian and Thai counterparts, Indonesia has been historically reluctant to accept foreign direct investment. This was due both to previous administrations and their policies, and also due to the economic cushion that was provided by the oil boom and the following industrialization into the manufacturing sector that started in around the 1980s. So at this time, the Indonesian government accepted mostly short-term investments, but all this changed in the end of the 1990s due to the Asian financial crisis. So at this point, the Indonesian economy lost investor confidence. Its economy took a downturn. So the government slowly saw the importance of increasing FDI. So if we look at the trend, it has been steadily increasing following a few years post-Asian financial crisis when investor confidence was regained back. Looking at who these investors are, we see that Singapore and Japan are the top two since 2009. And if we look towards the end, we see China at top 3 in 2008, surpassing the Netherlands. And although it is hard to see in this graph, the upwards trend of Chinese investments had begun in 2013, so around the time of the unveilment of the BRI project. So this increase in foreign direct investment is due to a number of reasons. First being the favorable taxation policies. And this was introduced in 2018 with the 16th economic policy packages. And examples of this were tax holidays for certain investments and also the revision of the investment ban list. So this was specifically targeted to special economic zones. And the second one being business environments. So in 2020, the government signed the Omnibus Law Bill into action, which removed a lot of the red tape involved with project implementation in Indonesia. So these things covered licensing, employment, and land acquisition. These two policies or government reforms were in line with the global maritime fulcrum vision of the current Indonesian president. of placing Indonesia as a central hub between the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, whether it is a leader in infrastructure or economic and political peacekeeping. The final element that attracted FDI into Indonesia is the labor market. So if we look at the graph, we see that not only the current labor force is quite present, but there's also an incoming labor force, making it a very favorable environment for long-term investments. If we look closer at the Chinese investments, we see that most of them are into the energy and manufacturing sector. But most importantly, if we look directly at the construction sector, we see that between 2018 and 2019, the investments doubled. So we see a clear trend of Chinese investments going towards infrastructure development. If we look closer at projects, these are in line with the National Medium-Term Development Plan, which is a small element of the long-term development plan. And the beginning of this plan was marked by the 2015 MOU signature with China Development Bank, where there was a commitment of a certain amount of investment into infrastructure development. Other plans followed, the most prominent one being the CDB financing of the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed rail lines. But these investments come with their challenges. First, a historical anti-Chinese sentiment in Indonesia has made the displacement of Chinese workers to Indonesia very difficult. There have been increasing worries of debt trap diplomacy, but this has been mitigated with the Indonesian strict contract laws. Although we have seen some reforms that have already been done, they are new and there is still a need for increased reforms, so this is a trend that we'll see in the future. And finally, there has been some political disputes or political pressures due to maritime disputes in the Natuna Islands.